Have you ever get the feeling that something dark is hidden just beneath the world map? Like, if you look too closely at Africa's border, you see blood leaking through the lines. Yeah, that is because those lines weren't meant to last. They were carved, not drawn, but with greed, violence and zero mercy. And soon, they just might play it again. See, they call it the brutal plan to redraw Africa. But don't get it twisted, because there is no official meeting, no grand summit. Because starting from the back streets of Biafra to the ghost towns of Ambazonia, from the scorched gold fields of Tigray to the oil-soaked graves of Cabinda, see, African is shaken, not by chance, but by design. A design stitched together by colonizers, then hijacked by mercenaries, warlords and foreign powers chasing minerals, influence and blood money. Hear this today. Africa was never stitched up together with care. Instead, it was carved up in back rooms by men who couldn't even pronounce the name of the rivers they divided. And guess what? The world is not watching. They are just scrolling. They are sleeping while borders rot and old wounds open again. This isn't fiction. This is a countdown. One coup, one drone strike, one rebel ambush away from Redraw, not just on paper, but in blood. So, if you came here thinking this was just another conspiracy video, turn back, because what's about to hear today, seriously, you are not going to hear this from any of your favorite news anchor. Here's the thing. I know the title alone sounds like it came from a leaked CIA file, but seriously, let's be real for a second. There is no official plan. No government made an announcement. No international body has signed off on any borders overhaul. Still, it feels believable, doesn't it? Because the truth is, Africans not exactly sitting still. There are secessionist movements boiling, foreign power meddling, and conflict over resources that never seem to end. And when you take that all in, you start to realize why rumor like this catches fire. But to really understand this, you've got to rewind the tape. Africans' borders, they weren't shaped by culture, by unity, or by the peoples themselves. Instead, they were drawn arbitrarily by colonial powers during the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. Strangers sat down, dividing our continent, splitting ethnic groups, forcing enemies into shared nation, and creating borders that made zero sense. According to reporting from Azawad, those same post-colonial artificial borders are still sparking violence and division today. And even though African unions made it law not to tamper with borders set at independence, law doesn't actually erase reality. So, is this brutal plan legit? Not exactly, but as a warning shot, as a mirror to the pressure that's building underneath the surface. Yeah, it is not as fictional as it sounds. Let's break down what's really going on. Let's start with Nigerian Biafra. See, the name hasn't gone away. IBOP, the indigenous people of Biafra. See, they are still in the fight up to this moment. But what is their goal? Well, a full breakaway of Nigeria's southeast, where the Igbo people are the majority. And they are not just talking. According to DW News, IBOP has enforced weekly sit-at-home strikes, shutting down entire cities to send a message to the government. Sometimes it is to protest injustice, other times it is to demand the release of the detained leaders, Nnamdi Kanu. But these aren't peaceful acts of civil disobedience. They've turned deadly. Reuters report that in just 4 years, over 700 civilians have been killed in clashes connected to these stay-at-home orders. But what are the Nigerian government doing? Well, they've officially banned IBOP. They labeled it as a terrorist group. And yet, the movement still holds influence. Yes, support for full secession might be fading according to some experts, but the region remains tense, unpredictable, and in many ways paralyzed by fear and division. It is not just political debate anymore. It is something people in the southeast live through week after week. And in 2017, a new name hit the world stage again: Ambazonia. That's what armed separatists in Cameroon English-speaking northwest and southwest regions began calling their self-declared country. But this didn't start with war. It started with protests. Teachers, lawyers, and ordinary citizens, they all stood up against the government's push to impose French language policy to the English-speaking regions. Then came the crackdown, then came the bullets, and that's when the real fight began. According to Redraw, over 6,000 people have died since the conflict broke out, and around 700,000 have been forced to flee their homes. It hasn't stopped there, seriously. Ambazonia separatists have enforced school boycotts, disrupting education of roughly over 600,000 children. Both sides have blood on their hands. Human rights abuses, intimidation, and violence, none of it is one-sided. And even now, the movement itself is fractured. There is no single leader, no clear direction. Outside observers says it's a movement splintered into fractions, each with its own agenda. And seriously, why the fighters on the ground keep pushing for independence? No country definitely recognizes Ambazonia. To the Cameroonian government, those regions are just provinces and nothing more. But to the people caught in the middle, this isn't about borders anymore. It is about survival. Now, let's move on to Mali. See, in the northern Mali, the name Azawad still echoes, but not as fantasy, but as a fight that never really ended. Tuareg rebels have been pushing for independent Azawad for decades, and in 2012, they declared it. But that declaration didn't bring freedom. It sparked a civil war, which quickly spiraled into jihadist takeover until French troops intervened to stop the collapse. In 2015, a peace deal was signed, though fragile, but at least hopeful a little bit. But I am telling you, since then, it has been falling apart, piece by piece, because in 2023 and 2024, that fragile peace shattered again, and this time, with clashes between Malian army and the coalition of Tuareg fighters known as the Coordination of Azawad movement. But it wasn't just Mali's army on the field. They were backed up by Wagner mercenaries, Russia's notorious private military network. And according to Human Rights Watch, their operation warrants claim, though they documented dozens of unlawful killings and execution of civilians in the military campaigns. Then in January 2025, things escalated again. A Malian drone strike killed a key moderate Tuareg leader, a move that may have silenced the voice of compromise and empowered hardliners waiting in the shadows. These aren't isolated clashes, they are warning, because the call for northern autonomy or full independence isn't going away. Though Azawad may not exist on the map, but it does on the mind of its people, and it is definitely very real. Now, let's move on to Ethiopia and Tigray. The guns may have gone quietly, but the tension never left. After the brutal civil war from 2020 to 2022, Ethiopia and the Tigray People's Liberation Front signed the Pretoria Agreement to end the fighting. But see, here's the problem with peace deals. They are just paper if nobody holds them up. Because according to the new humanitarian, the TPLF is now split. Rival factions inside the group are fighting not just for leadership, but for control of Tigray gold mines and state enterprises. And that infighting, it's paralyzing the Tigray politics and raising the risk of new violence. In early 2025, the mediators warned that the ceasefire could actually fall apart any minute. And if it does, Ethiopia isn't just looking at another skirmish. This could brutally turn back into civil war. Because outright secession might not be on the table, but if the peace shatters, so does any sense of stability. In the Horn of Africa, there is a place that declared back its independence at 1991, and that place is called Somaliland. It even has its own government, elections, and currency. Some even call it houses of stability, in a region scarred by chaos. But there is a catch. No UN member state recognizes it, not one. To Somalia, Somaliland is just the northern region, nothing more. And so, for over 3 decades, Somaliland has lived in political limbo, fully self-governed, but officially invincible on the world stage. No thanks, definitely no takeover, just quiet defiance and a sovereignty that only exists on paper. Now, we have Angola, in Cabinda. The thing is, most people don't even recognize it. But Cabinda, an oil-rich exclave, isn't connected to the rest of Angola. It is wedged between Congo and DRC, and its history runs deep with resistance. Back in 1885, Portugal made Cabinda a protectorate, but when Angola gained independence in 1975, Cabinda was absorbed against the wishes of many locals. Since then, it's been on a low-profile war zone, not on the headlines, but always simmering. DW News reports that in 2025, fresh clashes erupted between Angolan forces and Cabinda rebels, mainly FLEC factions. Photos of abuse emerged, brutality, torture. FLEC blames Angolan troops for the horrors. And here's the kicker. Cabinda produces 60% of Angola's oil, that is billions in revenue. But the people living there, they faced poverty, environmental destruction, and decades of neglect. It's not just a separatist issue. It is a wound Angola has never stopped bleeding. The thing is, African borders aren't just shaped by history. I am telling you, they are still being shaped at this moment, but by the ones who know how to play the long game. And this time, it is not colonizers with flag. It is foreign governments with checkbooks, machineries, and contracts. Let's talk about it. The thing is, once upon a time, France practically ran half the continent. But as of today, their grip is slipping little by little. Well, let's call it that. Because one by one, Francophone countries are shutting their door. Chad, Mali, Niger, and now even Senegal. That's not a coincidence. According to analysts at Understanding War, years of resentment, broke trust, and military coups have shattered old alliances. In places like Burkina Faso and Mali, anti-French protests aren't rare, they are routings. And even though some governments still call Paris when things get shaky, the people aren't having it anymore. But here's the thing, why France gets pushed out? Russians are moving in, but hard, not with diplomats, but with Wenger machineries, or as they are now rebranding themselves as part of African Corps. They promise security, but what they deliver? Massacre and fear. Human Rights Watch reported that in Mali, Wagner-backed troops helped launch drone strike on weddings and executed villagers during the counter-insurgency ops. This was just last year. Russia's strategy, well, is simple. Fill the void, cut the deals, secure influence, all while offering military support in exchange for mines and power. And just like that, Africa becomes a playground for global ambition. But while Russia is still at play, the US has their own play too. Africa was had its strong presence in the countries like Chad and Niger, but between 2023 and 2024, military coups forced them out. Now, Washington is back at square one, trying to build new partnership in the region where leaders are balancing east and west like chess pieces. They still send troops, still over counter-terrorism support, but they are not the only option anymore. With China writing checks and Russia offering guns, America's playing catch-up. See, China is also among, but they are quiet, calculated, and well invested. They are not staging coups. They are building roads, mining coverts and signing infrastructure deals. In Central and Southern Africa, Chinese companies dominate resources extraction, from lithium to copper to rare items. Officially, China affords the politics. Unofficially, their kind of money doesn't sit there quietly. To highlight, it looks like progress, but in local communities, it is turning into resentment. There have been protests in Kenya over land, resources, and what people call modern-day economic control. So, while China may not send soldiers, it is shaping Africa in ways just as powerful, and that's what makes the idea of redrawing map feel real, because the players pulling strings, they are not always on the ground. Now let's talk about resources and rivalries, because let's be honest, natural wealth is both blazing and at the same time a cause. Well, on a paper it looks like prosperity, but on the ground it is often the spark that light the views. Oil, that is the case everyone brings up first. Cabinda, let's say in Angola, that tiny province alone pumps out over 60% of Angola's oil. That is roughly around $40 billion a year, and this is according to DW News. But here's the catch. Locals barely see a dime. Revenues are diverted, pollution is rampant, and the people are left with poverty and resentment. No wonder separatist anger keeps boiling there. Now, zoom out. Nigeria's Niger Delta tells a similar story. Years of oil spills, stolen wealth, and broken promises have triggered decades of unrest. It is not always called separatism, but it is a rebellion all the same. And that's when Cameroon, Anglophone region, which also holds oil, that fact alone makes Yaoundé and Abuja fight even harder to hold those regions tight. Because oil doesn't just buy influence, it buys loyalty or even war. Now, let's take a step into the East and Central Africa, where the real battles are buried underground. In the Eastern DRC, it is not just war, it is 30 years scramble for minerals. Cobalt, cotton, tin, gold, lithium, and according to USIP, there are over 250 local armed groups and at least 14 foreign militias fighting for a piece of it. But why? Because these minerals powers the world. Smartphones, electric cars, satellites, servers, and every other thing. But for the people living there, it's become, in the word of Congolese mediator Petronile Vaweka, a matter of life and death. It is no longer a conflict, it is organized crime with uniforms and AK-47s. And it's not just Congo. Analysts are raising alarm about the new rushes in Rwanda, Zambia, and Tanzania, where lithium and rare earths are pulling up foreign interest and pushing locals to the edge. The pattern doesn't stop. You see it in Tigray, Ethiopia, with gold and cobalt. In Guinea, it is bauxite. In Liberia and the Central African Republic, it is gemstones. Wherever there are resources, there is struggle. And see, here's the truth most people miss. When a region is rich but ignored, it doesn't stay silent. It either fights to be heard or fights to break away. Colonial legacy and borders. You want to understand the chaos? Start with the map, not the modern one. The one drawn in rooms of miles away by the people who didn't even know the land, didn't even care about the cultures, and didn't even pretend to ask. Wilson Center and Ajasora both point out what most textbooks never say. Africa wasn't mapped, it was divided like cake. Straight lines, sharp angles, but no logic. Just deals between colonizers trading rivers and mountains like property deeds. As one scholar put it, those early map makers were giving away mountains and lakes to each other, never knowing where they were. And the price, we are still paying it today. Take the Somali people, split across 5 different countries: Somalia, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, and the pace of the northern region. Or the Darfur, split into 3 nations. And that's just the beginning. The lines were drawn to reflect people. They were drawn to reflect power. And what did that create? A continent full of artificial borders, built over real communities with overlapping fluid identities. And that is why today, so many conflicts feel personal. And honestly, they are. This isn't just history, it is active pressure. At the 2024 African Union Summit, one speaker said it straight. Post-colonial artificial borders continue to push countries into internal conflicts. Now, some thinkers like Makau Motwa have even floated the idea of returning to pre-colonial maps. Back to tribal boundaries, historical region, a setup that made more cultural sense. But most leaders know that would cost new wars, new splits, and blood on the soil all over again. So they play it safe. They stick to the AU's founding charter, which says all member states must respect the borders they had at independence. And in the other words, do not touch the line. Just leave it as it is, no matter how broken they are. And that is why, in practice, you see African leaders focus more on infrastructure and trade deals, not redrawing maps. Because the truth is harsh but simple. Fixing the lie could set up the whole house on fire. The takeaway, hype versus truth. let's cut through the noise. There is no secret border redraw plan, no signed deal, and no official map hidden in the vault. That title, it is fiction, yes, but the ingredient that made it believable, those are very real. We are talking about deep-rooted separatist movements from Biafra to Ambazonia, Azawad, and beyond. We are talking about the foreign powers, France losing ground, Russia stepping in with Wagner, and China stacking up investment, and the US fighting for relevance. We are talking about machineries, resources wars, and the continent building wealth while outsiders playing kingmaker. So when the media combines all that into one explosive headline, of course it feels like a prophecy, because chaos doesn't always need a plan. Sometimes it just needs a pressure. Here is what the evidence really shows. Africa is at a breaking point. Those colonials border from centuries ago, they are still holding, but barely. Yet under African Union law, changing those borders is nearly impossible. It is one of the founding rules. Do not withdraw, do not rearrange, do not reopen old ones. And here's the catch. Just talking about withdrawals can be dangerous, because rumors grow legs, and division, if repeated true, can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. That is why analysts and experts are sounding the alarm. Not about the maps, but about the real problem underneath: economic inequality, political exclusion, and how wealth is shared, not shared across regions. So don't fall for the clickbait. African is not on the verge of sudden withdrawal, but it is wrestling with fractures and with the outside forces that will love nothing more than breaking it from within, and that it definitely deserves our attention. See you next time.